Hi, everyone. So in the last video, you'll recall that one of the things that I discussed was why it's important to engage in ethical thinking, why it's important to take an ethics course, particularly in criminal justice. And I made a couple points as to why, and one of those points was that it's important to learn how to engage in critical thinking and to hone that ability to think critically, which is to say to think for oneself, to be open to new evidence, to reflect on your own behavior and ask if what you're doing is the right code of conduct, or if what you're doing is just based on what someone else has told you to do. And I made this provocative statement that if you're not engaging in critical thinking, then someone else is probably doing the thinking for you, and that to live a full, healthy life, we have to kind of really take charge of why it is that we act in the world and to what end do we apply our energy. So that's certainly true. I want to touch on just a little bit different reason why it's important to think seriously about ethics and why it's important to take an ethics and criminal justice course. Another reason that I think you should take ethics seriously and learn how to adopt an ethical way of thinking has to do with this concept of legitimacy. Now, legitimacy may strike you at first as being a very academic concept, and it may strike you as being very theoretical, and it is. But I want to convince you that legitimacy is absolutely crucial to the answer of why one should take ethics seriously and learn how to engage in ethical thinking. And specifically, I want to talk about a concept called legitimate authority. Okay, now if you're a police officer, the idea of legitimate authority may be very straightforward, especially the authority component of it, because police exercise their authority in very visible and I think obvious ways. But legitimate authority also has to do with other public safety professions. And I'm thinking here of, for example, anybody, an EMT, emergency responder. These are people who arrive to a scene and they really need the people that they're rescuing in particular, or the people that they're helping, to listen to them and to follow instructions and to not regard them with suspicion or contempt. And in order to do that effectively, they need legitimate authority. So this is a concept that's relevant to everybody who works in public safety. So here's a quick definition. Legitimate authority is the capacity to make claims that give others preemptive reasons for action. All right, it's the capacity to make claims that give others preemptive reasons for action. Now, a preemptive reason for action is a second order normative reason for action that replaces the first order reasons for action that addressees may have. That's a lot. So what am I saying there? I'm saying that when someone has legitimate authority, as police often do, as EMT and emergency responders often do, that what happens is they are able to give people a reason that they would otherwise not have, a second order reason. The first order reasons that a person in a crisis situation or a person engaged in criminal conduct might have for how they behave has to do with protecting themselves or helping themselves or getting away, okay? A second order reason is a reason that through society and the norms that we've built in society and the institutions and the people who occupy roles and offices in society, that second order reason is something that we've built that trumps the first order reason. So whatever it is you're inclined to do first based on whatever is you personally want to do, our society has built in a second order reason that is going to be prioritized. And that is that you follow the instructions of this person who's designated to be here to help us all get through a particular predicament, or that in the case of law enforcement, that you follow orders from that officer because they have the authority of the state. And if you don't, there are particular consequences that might befall you. But what's the basis of legitimate authority? I mean, why is it that people grant other people or offices legitimacy? And the answer to that is very difficult, but we have a long line of social theorists who have actually thought very carefully through that, and some of these theories have a good amount of evidence that support them. And I want to draw attention to probably the most important theory. You may have heard him if you're a sociologist or have a degree in sociology and criminology, and his name is Max Weber. And Weber posited three sorts of reasons why people are granted legitimate authority. The first reason I would point to is the law. Law has this legitimizing function. If you think about the iconic symbol of Lady Justice with the blindfold and the scales of justice, the idea here that is being conveyed within society is that law doesn't care who you are, that the law is the law and it will be applied evenly. It's not be paying attention to the color of your skin or how much money you make. If you broke the law, you'll be punished by the law. And the law is here for everyone to protect all of us. Now, that is the idea behind law, and we can have a conversation about why law may not live up to that ideal. But as an ideal, it's incredibly powerful, and it has this legitimizing force. So when we have an office that is acting to ensure that laws are enforced, or when we have an office that is acting to ensure that due process happens, that gives a kind of legitimizing force to that office. And it's a basis, it's a reason for why people listen to the people who occupy those offices. The second way in which authority is legitimated is from something called tradition. And by tradition, Weber was thinking about the kinds of traditions that have been sanctioned by a particular culture that may have existed from time immemorial and have a lot of cultural weight and reverence. Okay, so a dignitary who claims to be carrying out a custom or a tradition is not necessarily acting in accordance with some law that's been drafted, but because they are the carriers of tradition, they are accorded a great deal of respect and legitimacy. And it's a basis for why people listen to them. The third reason that Max Weber pointed to, we're not going to spend a ton of time, but I do want you to be aware of it, and that is simply charisma. And so what Weber was recognizing is that in some cases that he studied in particular, the reason that people listened to other people and accorded them a kind of authority to act and give them these second order reasons has to do with just the fact that they were charismatic. They were persuasive, energizing individuals such as a prophet or somebody who gets called a kind of savior. Some people have actually talked about Donald Trump in this way as a charismatic individual, and that's why he and the pronouncements that Donald Trump makes has influence over the lives of average Americans, not simply because he happens to have the title of President of the United States, which is legal, but also because he is a charismatic individual, and his promise of restoring an imagined America that is from the past, which is, his slogan, "Make America Great Again," that it's that kind of a narrative and that story, insofar as he was been able to sell it, that has granted him an authority, at least among some Americans. Okay, so returning to the question of why do ethics matter? Well, I've been talking about it the entire time, because if we're not acting ethically, and if we're unable to make informed and rational decisions about what constitutes ethical behavior and bring that kind of integrity into situations that we find ourselves in, what we're doing is we're acting in ways that chip away at our legitimate authority as people in the public safety sphere. In other words, it's how we act from situation to situation, from moment to moment, that builds that legitimate authority. that in acting out the duties of our office in a way that people expect those duties to be acted out, in an ethical way that is defensible and justifiable, what we're doing is not just performing our duties as a public servant. What we're also doing is we're building a case for why we are the rightful holders of that sacred authority. And so what this means is that legitimate authority is not something that's granted to you by a king or a president and then it exists for all time. Legitimate authority is a kind of sacred public trust, in a sense, that's given to you. And in order to maintain that authority, that legitimacy, one needs to continue to act and reaffirm for the public that you serve the basis for that authority. And so to go back to Max Weber, who said it was law, tradition, and charisma that's the basis for authority, we can add in there ethics. And ethics to some degree shades into law, because there's a tradition of thinking ethically in law and what the relationship is, something that we'll encounter more as the semester goes on. But it's also a bit of tradition too. We don't behave, every way that public safety people behave is not simply a matter of the law, it's also a matter of the tradition of that office. But the point here is that ethics is a crucial part of what public servants need to think about and act in order to maintain not just the dignity, but the legitimacy of their office.